Welcome to another episode of Tea with Rich, where this week we're joined by Kim Georgeton, the CEO of Cloudality, whose career goes back to the late 90s when she ran the team at Amazon that actually began prototyping non-reading material goods for sale on Amazon.com. Super excited to have Kim on this week, and per usual, we give her a chance to ask Rich and I questions at the end. And as usual, the answers are unpredictable and unique. Enjoy.
Sure.
I usually do a Mother's Day post to all the mothers, and which I think also includes fathers that are raising their kids on their own. Which I oddly enough I didn't do it this year on Mother's Day. I sort of shut down, and I had two of the three boys were here for the weekend. But for anyone listening to this, it always gets a text from me, "Happy Mother's Day." I apologize, but the boys were here, so we were doing boy things and golfing and stuff like that. Now, Kim, funny story. We met when you were at Trade Global, right? You actually came to the Pixel office when we were doing a collaboration with Cole Haan. Is that
We
correct?
did. We did. Yeah. That was crazy because we were competitors and also collaborating too. So yeah,
Correct.
it was an awesome experience. You got to, like I said, you got to go through the hard things, do the hard things first, and have respect while doing them. So
How
that's
you were you part of the leadership team? Like, tell me about your stint at Trade Global, because that I met you when you came up, and we basically had to do a collab to help. I forget what we were helping Cole Haan out of some jam that they were in. But how long were you with TG?
yeah. So Trade Global. So I worked there two different times actually. The first time I had recently moved back from Seattle. I worked at Amazon back in the early days. And so the e-commerce space was still super small in Cincinnati. Nobody was really doing very much with it. And Dave Cook had started Trade Global as it was originally called Philtech. And it was the first company that created sort of an operational supply chain program for Avon to be able to pick, pack, and ship all the Avon orders, if you remember that back in the day. And so out of that business, he became really specialized in health and beauty. And then it kind of translated into footwear and apparel, but from the health and beauty side. And he and I and his other partner, Dave Eckley, would often meet up at, various e-commerce events and quickly found out we were all from the Cincinnati area. And at one point he was like, we're getting requests from our customers to offer full end-to-end e-commerce services because they don't want to put e-commerce teams and don't have the capital to hire e-commerce teams. So he's like, I'm going to do this crazy thing. I'm going to create, a rev share business model where, there's a revenue share that I get from selling their products and services. And he's like, I want to incorporate digital marketing into it. So will you come and start up all of these aspects of digital marketing? So I came in at the time, we had SEM, SEO, email, content, so you name it. Social media was just emerging at the time. We tried, the original Facebook shopping capabilities. We had the data feeds. Amazon really wasn't that big yet, but we did a lot of, different functionalities with data feeds.
Kim, give us a sense for the younger generation, like what era you're talking about when you're talking about early days of social and Amazon not being big yet and things like that.
Yeah. So 1998 is the year I joined Amazon, and I was employee number 250 something for them at the time. They were bursting out of the seams at a building on 4th Avenue and Pike Street. And, my interviews at Amazon were one was in a stairwell, one was walking down Pike Street, Pike's Market. Another one was in Seattle's best coffee shop because they literally had no space. The HR team was just literally assigning interviews like anywhere they could possibly get, a free moment of time to speak to someone privately. So it was crazy days. They only had books when I started, and my job was to come on board. And at the time, I had experience in merchandising, and we wanted to create a gift center to test, measure, plunge. That's always been kind of the theme at Amazon: test first, measure, and then plunge. And so the gift center had about 120 items in it. It ranged from, purses, leather goods. I know you have a leather company, so I like to hear about more about that too. Like the Leatherman tool items. We had kitchen items from Le Creuset. We had toys, games, video games, you name it. We had like a smattering of different products across different industries. And so that gift center quickly, sold out of merchandise at the end of the 1998 holiday gift season. And with that, we learned a ton. We learned, how do we inventory these things? How do we handle the vendor relationships with these things? How do we project in order to have enough inventory the next time? Like, what are the algorithms that we need to be putting around this? Like, how do we create affinities? So, how do we like match people with different affinities and try to predict what they want to buy next? So, at the time, there was no sort of functionality for buy one, get one free. We created that at Amazon. That was one of the first projects I worked on, as well as developing the content management system there. So I had no technology had no technology background. I got dumped into a technology company, and next thing I know, I'm learning how to write Unix.
So you were there for their first 150 product tests just to see if there was something. I remember when the Kyle McNamara was this kid that worked for us, and he's like, "Yeah, have you heard of Amazon?" I'm like, "No." I think I've told this story to Rich. And I'm like, "What do they sell?" He's like, "Books." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, they just sell books." I'm like, "That's the dumbest name and the dumbest thing I've ever heard." And then, little do I know that you're back there doing like a little test run with
Yeah,
150 SKUs,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
which is pretty incredible. So, how long
yeah.
did you end up staying at Amazon?
It's crazy. I was only there for 3.5 years, but it seemed like 10 years. I mean, we were all in our 20s, and we were literally working like completely nonstop. We'd still be in the office at 4 a.m. And, for every launch, we had, parties and like, just in the office. People were sleeping on the floor. I mean, it was insane. And Jeff was very involved at that time. When I launched the gift center, I remember one time they designated the space to get all the samples because, we had to take photographs and capture all the dimensions. And we had editors that were writing literal like reviews of products. They were testing everything. It was legit editors.
No PIM. You didn't just pull it out of the PIM.
Yeah, no pen. No,
No
it was
PIMs.
legit. It was all like custom designed. And anyway, Jeff came into this like sort of room that we had designated for inventory at one point, and it was like a complete disaster. There were products everywhere. Shelves were like exploding with merchandise. Packages were torn open, pieces were missing. Like it was insane. And he came in and he was like, "Is this what we're working with?" And I was like, yeah, this is like all we have. Like literally there was one girl in a corner and like products were like exploding out of the room. And like the next week we had an entire new space in the warehouse cleared out, a library. We actually hired a trained librarian to come in and like organize all the things with like a Dewey Decimal type system and build nice big shelves to hold the various, items, whether it's like, a little ride on or like a tiny Monopoly game or whatever. By that was in 1998 when we built out that inventory structure there at Amazon. So it was crazy times. It was so fun, unlike anything else I've ever experienced since.
I like that a lot. I like the shout out to traditional library sciences too, right? Like, I think, taxonomy and, experience architects, quite frankly, are just the modern, librarian in my opinion. So I love that. I love that he took a bunch of, or you all took a bunch of what is now considered very old school traditional models to develop what was going to be the future. So you get out of Amazon, and how did you find your way over to Trade Global? And did you go over to Trade as a part of the leadership team?
So, it was really, there was no structured leadership team. It was Dave and Dave. They were the owners. And then, I did report directly to Dave Cook there. But, it was very, unstructured from that standpoint. But yeah, he asked me to come and create the digital group. And so next thing you know, here we have an entire digital group. At that time, Salesforce, well, Exact Target was our email platform, and we were resellers. So back in the day when all these companies wanted us to resell the platforms along with the capability of doing it. So we resold Exact Target as well as Demandware. And those were our two key platforms that our rev share model was built on, including all of the fulfillment and distribution out of the warehouse. And yeah, so it just evolved. It was great. It was awesome. And then I got the itch to go work on the client side. And as I mentioned, I came back a second time after Philtech had gone through a couple of acquisitions. Dave Cook ended up buying Trade Global back a second time after he sold it. I think for less than what he sold it for. So shout out to Dave Cook for his awesome business capabilities. And then he asked me to come back after I had been on the client side for a little while and continue to run it. And then he was actually in the process of selling it one final time. So, yep,
How
I worked.
funny is that, that Salesforce bought both of those companies,
Yeah.
right? They buy ExactTarget, and it's still the same exact product today, and then
Yeah.
Demandware, and it's still the exact same product today,
Yeah.
so although there is a webinar today that I'm gonna listen to after this podcast if I don't get called over to pick Jack up on I don't know if you've heard the Hub, Rich? Oh, yeah, of course you have. But apparently they're going to go all in and put all the horses back on the Demandware platform and reinvest. Hold on, I have to grab this phone call. We're going to hear this live. This is the hospital. My son's had his tonsils out, Kim. Hello. Yeah, what's up, Diana? Hi, I'm just checking to see. I heard you had a dentist appointment or something. I did. Checking your availability. Yes, I am back home. How's Jackson doing? Is he still proposing to the girls? Has he asked anyone to marry him yet? I can be over there whenever you need me. Don't need to keep him for any certain, period of time. If you come over, I can get him out of here and okay, perfectly. Yeah, yeah. Give me about 45 minutes and I'll be over there to get him. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Bye. Bye. Kim, back onto the TG thing. So how long were you with TG overall?
So probably about, let's see, 8 years, I'd say, between the two terms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what made you so I want to dig into the CEO role. I remember when you called me and you were like, "Yeah, I just want to give it a shot. We'll see what it's like." And you're on the Salesforce platform and, focused in primarily manufacturing right now, but, doing the clouds that matter to you, right? Still in exact target too, oddly enough. So, talk to us about sort of the process of like hearing about and finding your way into cloudality and kind of what you went through sort of contemplating taking on that role sort of as a first time CEO working for founders actually.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You have to understand a little bit of a context on how Trade Global ended up in order to understand how I got to where I am because they went through an acquisition by Jagged Peak, and then Jagged Peak sold to Singapore Post. Then Singapore Post running it out of Singapore. Basically, it'd be like selling an e-commerce business to the United States Postal Office. So, they didn't know what to do with the product, with the actual business, and they ended up deciding to sell it off. And so, in the process of selling it off, they found a company called ID Logistics that they wanted to sell it to. And I was like, that's a logistics company. All they do is logistics. They don't do anything e-commerce or marketing related. So I could see the writing on the wall from my whole team. I had about 35 people on my team at the time. And so I went to the CEO of that then company and said, if Idea Logistics is going to acquire us, I don't really see a place for me and my whole team in the future. Let's talk realistically about this and, what does this hold? And, through many like strategic conversations with him and many months, 6 to 8 months, the process took, I ended up taking my whole team of 35 people and moving them over to a company called Simplist. Because if you recall at the time in Salesforce's evolution, they wanted to switch from being individualized SIs into SIs that can handle the whole tech stack.
Sadly, I do remember that.
Yeah, we remember it.
So hold on, you took your entire squad and relocated them to a new firm?
Yes.
That's fucking I've never heard of that. That's amazing.
I mean, that's
Yes.
pretty cool that they let you do that. I mean, that had to be a good negotiation.
It was there were a lot of things that were said that were unsaid that had to be then realized over time. But yeah, I mean, it actually helped with the overall purchase because once we peeled off that business, then the ID logistics company could look strategically at the distribution side and fulfillment side of things without having to account for like this side business. So I was able to make that business case internally to actually help with the sale. And then along with that in parallel, I was working with my Salesforce partner rep, who James Williams, who is so amazing.
Oh yeah,
Love that guy.
James.
yeah.
I love
Yeah,
James.
yeah, he is one of the most like good, best people I've ever met. So I was like, James, Salesforce is trying to go this whole tech stack strategy. Do you know any companies out there that don't have e-commerce and marketing that could potentially benefit from it as they evolve their strategies going forward? So he gave me a list of like 5 to 10 companies. And he's like, here's your top bets. And Simplus was one of those companies that I reached out to. And I immediately met Ryan Westwood, who was the CEO at Simplus, and he was amazing, a very forward thinking, completely on top of what was going on in the business type of CEO. And he was willing to listen to the story about what was happening. And he was also recognizing that at some point they were going to go into an acquisition and it would benefit them to be able to tell the story of having the entire Salesforce stack. And so they sort of, it wasn't an acquisition. It was literally one day I took my whole team and we resigned from the Trade Global business. And the following day, I had arranged for Simplus to fly in. They had all of the laptops shipped to
Wow.
Cincinnati. We had, reserved a room at one of the local hotels. All 35 of my team members were around the table. They had an HR person fly in, Brad Warnock from Simplus, who was also amazing. And they set up the onboarding process. We did a full day of onboarding. And the next day, I transferred all of the contracts that I had that were specific to e-commerce and marketing from Trade Global into Simplus. And voila, we had like an instant business
Awesome.
templates.
I've literally never heard of that. That's stunning.
I think that's smooth.
Shout out to Simplus. That's amazing. I think it's amazing that you cared enough to do that. A lot of people don't think that way, right? A lot of people aren't worried
Right.
about their teams and
Yeah.
the lineage that they've developed.
I know. Well, and I was receiving a lot of job offers to go other places myself that would have benefited me more. And I didn't do that. There wasn't a discussion about money. It was more about like, how can I get my people full, and keep them
Right.
whole and keep them employed during this process. That was really my whole like objective. And so that ties into how I end up now at Cloudality because, multiple of those people who were impacted by the eventual acquisition of Simplus are the ones who now started Cloudality. And they know that historically, I'm someone who protects people on my team. And they know that, like, no matter who's leading the company or what ideas the founder has, that I'm going to boil it down to, like, how are we going to protect the most people? So that's why they asked me to come and be their CEO, and why I accept because I have a history with many of them, and I want to see not only Cloudality succeed, but also hopefully be able to bring other people who have been impacted by the most recent layoffs from all of these technology companies that we're seeing out there right now. So I'd love for us to grow huge and be able to rescue a lot of these people who have been impacted.
What a great what a great karma move, the whole simplest thing, and then those guys going off and starting their own thing and then being like, geez, we need a good leader. And I know somebody that made some selfless moves and cared about staff. I did not know that story. Who did Simplus eventually get bought by?
Infosys.
Geez, yeah, that's you disappear in there. So funny story. I think Singapore Post bought a buddy of mine's agency one time as well out of Australia, trying to also get into e-commerce and APAC. Also didn't know what to do with it. Also, they bought themselves back. Actually, that's I think that was who bought JB, wasn't it?
It was
Rich
wasn't
Singapore
it, I thought it was Ambleek, right?
and Bleak. Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. But I mean
With
JB's business.
Eustace and JB was there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, with Singapore Post, wasn't it?
Yeah,
And
it
then they
was.
also
But
had no idea they had no idea what to do with it, so they ended up buying it back. And actually, I think Eustace is back over there running Ambleek. So small world. So how long have you been at Cloudality, Kim?
So technically, since January, I started contracting a little bit for them in November and December. But the company then was moved from an LLC to a C corp effective in January. So we're setting ourselves up to, hopefully be able to grow, and we want to double the business from now through 2028, and potentially be considered for an acquisition event as well in the future, enabling, a lot of people to then benefit from, the 5 years of hopeful success that we'll have at Cloudality.
So Kim, leading up all these ideas, how it's going to be, what it's going to be like, and all of that, and then you get in there and you're 4 months in. So how's that transition been for you?
Yeah, it's been a huge learning experience. It's been so awesome because when you get four original founders in a room, that they you have four different opinions. So being able to manage that and watch how that has evolved over the course of the last several months, and how people make their decisions, and one of the things that we're breaking off as a team to do at the end of this month is do the disc profile. As the founders are having differences of opinion, they can then, with the disc profile, help to understand how does so and so make decisions and what drives, this person's decision making process, and how can we come together, to make sure that we're making the best choices for the company going forward. So that's one thing that we're kicking off that I think is really going to help.
Well, that's super helpful. We did something similar to that. We did something called the care profile. But it was similar just to understand what's important to people, how people make decisions. I mean, I thought it was super important. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people, like, right off the bat, like, might get, "I don't wanna do that," or "I've done Myers-Briggs so however many times," or but I'm impressed at how everybody's embracing it, and I'm hoping that, we're also reading Five Dysfunctions of a Team, um, and that's our main books.
What have you found to be the biggest misnomer of what you thought it was going to be like versus what it is like being in there, a few months in as a CEO?
I think it's just the gaining alignment piece is the biggest challenge and opportunity. You come in with an idea of something where you think that the company could focus on and have a good return on investment, but you've got to get the alignment of the people who are behind the scenes. So you can't just roll something out from the top down. You have to get the business needs to be rolled up from the bottom up in order to make sure that people are owning what they're doing. So for me, luckily, I was on client side in some big corporations in the past, and I was already exposed to a lot of strategic planning types of documents. So initially in February, I rolled out, and unfortunately, we were a little bit late to the game, but I rolled out a whole strategic planning program that, again, like, I think people scoffed at a little bit, but produced everything that we were able to come up with in terms of, like, what's our strategy, how do we go to market, who's gonna be in charge, like, what's the process gonna be like, where the process flows, what are our standard operating procedures. So from all of those things, we're getting boiled up from the bottom up, which I felt was just really important, rather than having somebody come in and, like, press down on everybody, like, "Hey, we're doing this." So, like, Shopify was kind of a good example of that. Like, we knew we had a great opportunity with adding Shopify into our model, but when it came right down to it, it just didn't fit with the strategic, plans that everybody had put in place. And so, it quickly, like, a lot of our discussions at the beginning were like, "How are you niching down? Like, what are you really focusing on? What are you going to say no to as a company instead of, like, being a yes man all the time?" And, one of the offsites we had, I found, like, this really cool Dilbert cartoon, and it's like, here he is, like, and he's like a sales development representative, and he's picking up the phone and, like, answering. Yeah, see, I do that. I don't do this. He's, saying, like, the customer's on the other end and they say, "So what do you do?" And, he's tells them, and she's like, "Well, will you do this?" And he's like, "No." And he hangs up the phone. Like, and that's the whole cartoon, because I went back to the team and I was like, "What are we going to say no to? Like, we have to decide now before we, like, develop our strategy. Like, what are we gonna draw our line at?" And so that's why we dropped Shopify. And it really came from that bubbling up process, as well as it really matched with the feedback we got from the advisory board. So I'm so thankful that you guys are in place, kind of reinforcing the decisions we're making as a management team.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a whole business into itself, the Shopify stuff, and, I was glad that I wasn't the one that said it too, so I forget who the gentleman was, but the gentleman that first questioned it, and I like how you go through the board decks, and then we all get a few minutes at the end. It's hard for me to actually be quiet. You don't know me that well, but it's very, very difficult for me to sit through 45 minutes, I already have your deck. I've already rewritten half of it, so I'll send that back to you as well.
Yeah.
I did, Rich, I'm like, I got you. You send me a pitch deck. How has it been institutionalizing process and pipeline and things like that, knowing that you have four founders that have worked off of like intuition, adrenaline, and sort of stick to itiveness, right? I mean, because that's usually an interesting transition as well.
Yeah, we have a great example we just worked on for some open SOWs that we're trying to fulfill for 2025 and how those have gotten assigned resourcing capabilities. And so we're basically just created this project kind of re-looking at like who we put on these projects and why we put them on and reallocating some of those hours to full-time staff instead of utilizing external part-time people to do the work because we're finding we're paying like 3x, 4x, 5x resources and we have just received the visibility to our full-time people utilization and there's a gap there, so we have open capacity for full-time people. So that was a process that wasn't in place. They were just selling, what they could sell, and the team that was dedicated there was just fulfilling it. There was no level of utilization, so we just got mission control up and running. And I said, hey, let's relook at, we know what we're going to do going forward in terms of scoping and estimating and ensuring that we've got enough profit built in on the front end. Then we're going to get the skill matrices populated and, have somebody in charge of assigning resourcing as we go forward. But we've got these open contracts from the past and, they need some attention in terms of being able to look at what is going to be the resulting profitability of those projects at the end of the day after all the work has been delivered. So that has been a project that just popped up in the past few weeks. And retaking a look at that and, not making any judgments or anything like that, but just changing course as we go forward in the delivery process for the
That's
rest.
amazing. Rich, did you guys all when did you start tracking utilization? Because I know it's like a latent metric for us. Rich, did you always track it or
Well, I mean, because when we started, we were much more staff aug, right? So the concept of utilization didn't really become relevant until we started taking on projects and had project managers and such. So
so what
not later, but then it became super important. I mean, but we weren't. I mean, some people said crazy utilization because we had people that worked across projects, right? Technical architects were never full time on one project. Creative, like you're saying, digital marketing, digital strategy, never full time on one project. So when we got bought by Capgemini, they couldn't understand this concept. They were all FTEs. And we're like, we don't do FTEs. Like we just really didn't do FTEs. I mean, we had utilization, but across multiple projects.
that's why their stuff costs so much money too, is because so I mean, across projects is where the magic happens, right? So what's staff aug? Like, is that
We are,
why don't you
we
have to
are,
track staff aug?
when we started, we were just doing like, you called me and you needed a, SAP, FICO person, a sign-on person, you needed an RPG person. And I would just give you a person.
Full time.
Yeah, and you managed them, I wasn't managing anything, so that was literally
Okay.
staff aug. You're taking managing them, I'd call that person and they say $80 an hour, and then I call you and I say $100 an hour, and I made
All
20
right.
on the spread, yeah,
So
that was the thing.
you just don't have the accountability on utilization. It's really about getting them staffed out.
Yeah, so that was in the beginning, but then once we got to doing projects, then it
Since day one, always tracked everything. Like we literally made people do logs constantly because I wanted to know where people are spending their time. And it wasn't really to keep track of them. It was really to see, how long did it take to do these tasks, right? And that was kind of how we understood, like, might take somebody that was working with me 4 days to do something that I would do in a day. But I wouldn't leave. I would do a 19-hour day to get it done, right? So it's weird stuff like that. So Kim, who do you go to so you're the boss now? There's nobody to talk to really, not about the real stuff, the real worries and the real nerve stuff. Like who do you rely on and kind of lean on for mentorship and support and like sounding board stuff? Because I never brought work home. Rich, I don't know if you did, but I never talked with girlfriends or wives or anything like that about work until I met Shannon. I have a unicorn
I mean,
now.
not much. I mean, I tried to keep it out of the house, especially when we had kids, right?
How about you, Kim? Like, who do you mentors you now, and who do you rely on, and who do you sort of look towards when you're looking for guidance?
I mean, I think all of you guys on the advisory board are pivotal. And one of the reasons I wanted to start the advisory board was because we have four board directors who are also operators. And I felt like, they would need outside opinions to, perhaps sway them, into different ideas and different things. So, I look to you guys a lot. That monthly meeting is really important for me and I get excited about it. And then, it's funny, my husband too, he owned a restaurant for, 30 years. And as funny as it sounds, like the utilization conversations, like there's so much carryover that's similar when you run a restaurant because it's also very chaotic. And, he's super smart. And, even though he's just kind of run restaurants, it's totally applicable. All of the advice that he has when he hears stories behind the scenes, what's going on. And he's like usually right on with, like that person doesn't sound like they know what they're doing. That person's right on. Like, and like it's 2 seconds that he has to overhear a conversation. And he's like, yep, I got their number right away.
That's great.
I don't think a lot of people appreciate that the only difference between a restaurant and a tech business is the average salary. So you still got politics, you still got the gossip line, you still have, you still have the people you have to worry about and the people that you don't. And,
So true.
it is. I mean, I've had a lot of jobs, and the only thing that separates most companies is the pay grade at the end of the day. So I'd like to think it's different as you grow up and make more and do more. But I have learned through thousands of brands that it's no different. It's literally, as you say, it's like herding cats. It's running
Yeah.
a zoo.
Yeah, and I tell the team too, like, hey, I'm not right about everything. I make mistakes. So don't take what I say as 100%, like we can't sway off of that. I'm always like, challenge me, fight me on this, I'll say, like if you disagree, like let's talk about it and, let's change course if we need to. I'm very adaptable, I guess, or flexible that way that I'm able to understand, when you hit a certain resistance, then you have to go a different course.
Yeah, I've always it was interesting with us running a business. It took a long time for me to realize that they didn't work for me. I worked for them, and then they don't even believe it when you tell them. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, I'm actually here for you. But it's interesting. Like, true leadership is being a servant to those that rely on you, right? And there's a lot of families. Like, we used to say the same thing. It's like, supporting a community. It's not just the staff, it's their husbands and wives and partners and kids and mothers and dads. There's so many moms and dads of modern tech workers that are on we call it the scholarship program, and being taken care of by their younger kids. So the story of you taking a 30 plus size team and moving them blows me away. I've never heard of anything like that. And I think that probably says everything about your ethics and kind of where your head's at. So, given that, Kim, like, so who inspires you? Like, how do you stay inspired, or who do you look towards to kind of learn from outside of the advisory board? I mean, like you personally.
Yeah. I mean, my mom who passed away definitely is a huge inspiration. She was a tough lady. So she taught me how to be tough. And then, of course, my daughter for her future, so those are kind of the generational motivations that make me get up out of bed every day.
That's good. I like that. I'm gonna have to write that one down on my kids. Do my kids inspire me? This is a question for me to ponder. Do my kids inspire me? Well, we had a big meltdown yesterday with one of my boys who's like, he had brain damage when he was born, so he's got cerebral palsy, and he's like, I'm 21 and it's ridiculous that I live at home and I want to live on my own. And he's done so much amazing things in the last 90 days that, like, when things get frustrating, he just gets wicked mad. And I'm like, but look at all these things you've done. Like, you have 3 jobs right now. You didn't have 3 jobs 100 days ago. All right. He wants to drive. It's his dream to drive. So I bought him a high-end driving sim setup, and I like rigged the gas and the brakes so that he can learn to drive on a track on a video game. And I'm like, you prove to me you can maintain 75 miles an hour on the Nuremberg, right? It's not very fast on the Nuremberg, and do that for a couple of months, and then we'll put you back in a car, right? So
That's cool.
it is interesting. I'm trying. It takes a conscious mind to remember the good. I think evil is frustrations are always top of mind. You have to really be in the moment to appreciate the good that's going on. So, Kev, would you like to ask us anything? We always love to get questions from guests and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll ask you guys, what were the biggest surprises for you when you transitioned? I mean, I know, Tom, you kind of grew into pixel media and you were already at that higher level, but and Rich too for you. Like, I'd love to hear what your realizations were as you stepped into that role and how you think that might be different today when we're seeing all the incorporation of AI. That impacts the success going forward. And then even from a male to female perspective, there's definitely differences, I think, there too. And I'm sure you've had some observations. So I'd love to hear your unedited, thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish what I was just talking about, I think the big thing for me was maturing to the point where I was there for them and I was accountable for them, and that every decision that we made was really for staff. Even taking PE and selling to IPG, like Eric Huberman asked a similar question a couple of months ago, like not. We did it because we thought it was a good thing. We were trying to protect our legacy and protect our staff and give everybody a long-term home. It didn't end up working out that way because your suitors don't always have the vision you have. Sometimes it turns into a numbers game. And if you're not making your numbers, then, I'm willing to not take a check if I don't make my numbers. Most acquiring organizations aren't. And I'd say the other big realization was like it just never got easier. It was always a different type of hard. I remember like, all right, I can relax this week or I can relax this month or like I have this person for that or these persons for these things, or I finally got this team where I need it to be. And, that the moment I took my eye off the ball, things would start sliding around. Like, I think the constant vigilance as a leader and the constant, probably psychological side of it as well. Like, I felt like I was more of a cheerleader and a psychologist in a good way than I was like a boss or a practitioner or a founder or something like that. It was always just trying to, just keep everybody's heads above water, especially with the pace of change that is going on right now, right? We were coming into COVID, people were freaking out. During COVID, we all thought we were just going to sit home and drink and eat chips for a month, right? And then commerce took off and nobody understood that wasn't going to last forever. Like, we weren't going to change everybody's habits to be digital first. So then you're trying to manage expectations after that, and now we've got AI coming in, and it's getting talked about to the point where it's actually freaking people out versus calming them down. And I think that my perspective on that is the same as what I learned as a leader, is that it just takes constant vigilance. Like, I remember when mobile was new. I remember when social was new. I remember when Facebook was new. I remember when Amazon was this weird dude selling books, and, I thought it was a bad idea. So, I was there when e-commerce became commoditized, when Shopify came out. Like, I think what we have as executives with tenure is that we've seen enough things. We've seen recessions and wars and challenges and now the pandemic, that it's just another thing to manage and mitigate. And it's also, I think, when we talk about AI, and don't get me wrong, very powerful, it's moving very fast. I think that it's getting over talked. And I think that people need to stay focused on the basics of what they're doing and what they can do. Most businesses have no idea what to do with AI. And some guy named Rob, that's a junior in college, that's interning, that knows how to use all the tools, isn't the same as a 30-year enterprise veteran, let alone a team of 20 or 30 or 100 enterprise veterans in a $1 billion organization. You know, they're just not going to pick this up anytime soon, right? They just aren't. It'll do great things, but I think, like anything, it just needs to be looked at the right way and integrated the right way. And, you got to get out there and do your fast fails. Is it VHS or is it, beta? right? I think that's the battle. If anyone, we're old enough to remember that battle, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's been interesting. I think again, the thing that always amazes me is that the constant vigilance and constantly being a cheerleader and constantly being a little bit of ahead of where everyone is and trying to bring people together towards a common good. That's really what I think 95% of leadership is. I don't think it's metrics and KPIs and pipeline and bullshit. I think it's showing up every day and being a cheerleader for your staff because your staff isn't generally going to be strong enough to be a cheerleader for themselves. That's kind of me boiling down 30 years.
It's a good
Rich,
point.
I jumped right on that. I gave you so much time to think about an answer, Rich.
I mean, it's interesting question. Like when a couple transitions, when I transitioned from like a sale, I was an engineer and, worked in consulting, and then I got my MBA and I was like a VP of sales and marketing. But then I stepped back and sold, right? So it's different managing sales versus actually. So that was super important to me to like carry a bag and realize how hard it is. And then I got promoted, right? And I became, head of sales, right? And here was the most interesting thing, like, you know, someone who I was a peer to, then I'm their boss. And then they come in my office and they're complaining about something, and I'm telling them, come on, like we can't complain. Like, what can we do about it? And they're like, you were just bitching about this fucking same thing 2 weeks ago. So it was like pot kettle. Like I learned some really powerful lessons about like, you know, complaining, responsibility. And I think what you said, TJ, being a CEO is, it can be lonely. We talk about that a lot. There's times where, you kind of have to always put on a face and have to have like my word is like unconflicted consciousness. Like you can't show, you can show fear. I don't mean that, but you can't like times where you're like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, and you have uncertainty, and you're like, I don't know if we're going in the right direction. And you can't tell your staff that. You can't have that conversation with your staff and be like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, right? Like going home and crying, right? Like for real. Like, but you can't do that. You have to be like, we're going to do it. Like we're doing the right thing. And you have to have that kind of unconflicted, like you're saying, TJ cheerleader, but like, we're doing the right thing. You guys are the best team. We're serving our customers. Like you're kind of like have this drumbeat of your core values are and what you're providing, but it doesn't mean you don't have your own fears. And that part I think was really kind of a hard. And I had good coaches and mentors where I remember like literally for real, like being like, I'm not sure. And you
Take our
can't say
anxiety
that.
home every night.
But you can't say that, right? And you can't, say it to your managers. You got to come back the next day and be ready to. And I do think, in coaching, younger entrepreneurs now and things, like I kind of hit them pretty hard between the eyes about, you can't go to work hungry. And, and when I say hungry, I mean hungry for affirmation. Hungry, like you can't go to work and expect your staff to affirm you. And I just see too many people do it, right? They want to go in and they want their staff to tell them what a great job they're doing. And, exactly what you're saying, TJ, like it's the opposite. Like
Yeah.
I have to find my nourishment. I have to find my affirmation from my wife, from my friends, from my coaches, whatever. Because when I come into work, it's about affirming my team and it's about affirming my customers. And it's about like, I can't be there being like, affirm me. Like I can't be there going, that was my idea. I said that. Like you can't say my idea. Can't do it. Right. And I think that's hard.
Yeah.
It takes a ton. We talk, TJ and I talk a lot about self care, on our podcast and things. And it's kind of like you got to be ready because when you're there, you got to be on for your team and for your customer, not for your.
It's parenting.
Yeah.
It's exactly like parenting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
That's
exactly
so
like
true.
parenting. It really is. And I didn't really appreciate that till I had kids and had to like share all my time. It's interesting that I never heard you say the affirmation thing, Rich, but you literally have to be it's not even like you can be confident because I remember going home with crippling anxiety. Like I would fall asleep easy because I was exhausted, but then I'd wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning in a full body sweat. But you're right. And then you go in and it's like everybody just is mad about something. And you got to go in and calm everybody down. There's no time for affirmation because you literally, you are the cheerleader, right? So
And it's Kim, and it's interesting you asked about, men. It's funny. My wife's book, plug for Gertrude, she's launching today, Rewrite the Mother Code. And it is about the mothers, whether you have children or not, like there is I think a different capacity in terms of mothering ideas, mothering organizations, mothering people. And I think we have feminine aspects to us, TJ and I, where we're trying to do that with people. Like but I'm being serious, like, where you kinda you're mentoring your staff and you're saying, "No, you can do this," and you're holding them to a certain level of accountability, but I do think women are better at it. I mean, so
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like through my is I'd say maybe even early phase, I went through this realization that women are definitely judged by like by different responses that we give. We can give the same response that a man gives, and it can come across very edgy, very bitchy almost. Versus a man saying it, you can kind of say it. And it's funny because our founders are all men. And so, at times, I'm like, hey guys, I'm going to be direct here. Let me put my mom hat on for a second. You need to like tighten up your belt, like pull up your britches and,
right?
don't be baby anymore. So
No, but I
I
think it's
being,
important. I mean, and I hope it's changing, right? Because I have a wife and I raised 2 daughters, right? Grown daughters, and it's kind of like I had to tell them exactly what you're saying, like, "You could do anything,
yeah,
but the world
yeah.
but the it's not always fair, just know that. But you can do anything, and and sometimes you need to fight.
that's such a wholly different topic too. Like I someday we'll get a panel on here and talk about this whole like beating down of what the male brings and toxic masculinity and all of that stuff. But because it is interesting what you say, Rich, is that it is a partnership, right? Like it has to be a partnership. And I am who I am because of my wife. Right. That's where I get my confidence from. And I think she is who she is because of me. Right. And it isn't about competition or anything like that. It's about a natural respect for the masculine and feminine energy and what she allows me to do and feel and what I allow her to do and feel. And we don't really talk about it. It's just, it works that well. And the reason I bring that up is because I think for all the time that I owned a business, I always thought that the female leadership team was always the best leaders. I thought that they had the best empathy and they listened well and they were thoughtful, and especially the moms, and they just operated at a different beat, I think. And no offense to all my male leaders, guys, I apologize, but you guys all know, like
Well,
Gail.
yeah, most of our account managers were women, and they handled conflict and they handled relationship, and it was awesome. I mean,
Well,
it was
they're
awesome.
not afraid to be emotional either. We're so fucking petrified to be emotional, and by emotion isn't necessarily just crying, but like I don't know. I thought, Kim, I thought that the leadership team we had, the ladies were the best, and I think they were the best because they were very even keeled. And as a mom, there isn't much they haven't seen, and as a dad, there's a lot we didn't see. So I know that sounds kind of
It's,
weird, but
no, it's
the
true.
traditional roles are you know being blown out right now. So I don't know what the next generation is going to have to do. So
I don't think the roles are changing as much as they they say or people
I
think.
think we're getting back. I think we're going back. I think things are normalizing and evening out, but I do think we've had a period of absolute insanity and and vilifying dads, quite frankly. So, I went through the divorce process and I know exactly how the legal system treats men,
It's
which
terrible.
isn't well, unless you want to be an absolute savage, but a story for another day. Rich will never know what that's like.
I've seen that in
I'm
practice.
past it now. I'm past it now.
Kim, what else can we answer for you today? Anything else you would like to ask us? I know those are long answers. I might have to reinsert the question after I finish for Rich.
I guess, as you think about, or as I think about Cloudality's future and balancing capital infusions from internal versus like how to roll that out to invitations for people directly in our network, and then the Salesforce Venture Program, and then general VC in general, like in terms of being able to manage our cash flow and add capital and add, things that we want to as we grow. Like, what advice do both of you have around?
I never did it. I never did it, so TJ's gonna have to. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. I guess I bootstrapped. So I sucked it up pretty hard. Home equity loans. Chasing checks, checking the mail every day, writing personal checks to clear payroll, like all the really fun stuff that gives you heart attacks, like TJ anxiety when you're going home. But I chose to do that, and it was mainly out of I wanted to maintain control, now eventually we did do bank loans and we did do lines of credits and things like that, but that's different. We didn't, the only, and this is a story for a different time, and I probably already told it actually, but the only time outside capital was when the banks crashed, it was at '08, '09, whatever, and we had a line of credit, we had a loan, and they got called in. Our bank went out of business. Literally, our bank went under, and all of that got called in. And so, like, we're like, how do you pay a loan back and a line of credit back when that's what you're using to run your business? Because you're growing so fast, we could kind of never catch up because we were hiring quicker than we're getting paid. So I did borrow money from my mom. So, speaking of women and strong women, like my mom lent me money. So we keep growing and not, I was like, do we want to become a lifestyle business? And Dave kind of wanted to do that. And I was like, I don't want to be a lifestyle business. Like I want to grow to be the best. And so we need capital. So she did bridge us for a while during that time. And so she was on my board and, so I kind of had to manage that relationship, her being my mother, but her also being a lender and then her being on my board. And it was great. She's still alive. She's at 80. She'll be 81 this year. And so she was a great influence. But it was something, I had to manage, but I never did the private equity. When we sold to a strategic, and that was because there was so much happening. So we brought in another party to help us grow besides my mom, which is funny.
Hold on. You got a strategic. No, you got to tell the truth. You got a strategic buy because when Salesforce bought Demandware, you thought they were going to fucking kill it immediately and ruin our platform,
I
and
totally did. I mean,
and you
what?
weren't wrong. It just took a few years longer than we
No, I
thought.
mean, 80% of our business was, Demandware. And then when Salesforce bought it, I was kind of like, wait, I've been running this business for 14 years and putting my, heart and soul and sweat and money in it. And it was kind of like a move. Like I said, "Well, if something bad's going to happen, like I owe it to my family, actually, because, you know, people think you have this big room of money. Right. And it was like, I didn't have any money. Like all the money was in the business. Right. I mean, literally, like I didn't have savings. I didn't have investments. Like, what are you invested in? I'm like, I'm invested in Lions Consulting Group. That is where everything is invested. So when that happened, it was a kind of a time to like, this is too risky. So we need to, kind of make a move. And how do we assure that we're going to have a future? And so,
It's funny you say the whole money thing because I remember distinctly a staff member at one time who had been with us forever. He'd actually come and gone and come back like 3 times. Things were like getting tough. I forget which of the 3 or 4 recessions we went through it was, but he's like, "You guys will be fine. I'm sure you're sitting on a mountain of cash." And I was like, "No." He's like, "No, no, you have to be. We've been killing it for like 15 years." I was like, "And spending it? Like, what do you think? There's like, you think we're just like skimming cash off and I got a $5 million bank account? I mean, I fucking, I had to cash out I mean, when I got divorced, I had to pay my half of the estate in cash to keep the business, and I didn't have the money to pay for my half of the estate. So, I had to, work my ass off for a year and pray that we had bonus money. And then I basically just had to fucking sign that check over to my ex-wife.
now
So
it's funny that people just have this illusion, right? And we're like, we thought breaking even was great. right? That we at least broke even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We made good money, but it was like life is expensive though. Like again, these are all like these are younger folks with, younger kids. And I'm like,
But I always thought the business was expensive. Like next year, like we're thinking about we need to do this and we need to do this, and we're hiring like freaking crazy. And when you're growing that fast, like you're hiring way ahead and you're just not getting cash in quickly enough. And especially like some of your big customers, they don't pay. I mean, they don't pay fast.
yeah,
I mean, we
No.
tried to do
deposits.
stuff like retainers. We tried so many things to get some money in up front, but it's kind of like sometimes you're just like, come on, dude, like you got to pay us. Like you're paying
Yeah.
late.
We were a
Yes.
little different, Kim. I mentioned this to you on a call. But, we never got over our skis. Like, we didn't grow at the pace you did, Rich, because we never had a line of credit. Like, we operated for 30 years without a line of credit. Like,
Wow,
we didn't have a note anywhere.
that's crazy.
But, we had to write checks once or twice. At the time they were enormous checks. But and this for anybody listening, I don't believe in getting ahead of yourself. I think that if you have a good if you have a good model for pipeline and receivables visibility and you stay diligent, which is hard to do with your customers, it's hard to get somebody to call a customer and say, yo, we gave you 45-day terms. You're already 45 days late on there. We never charged interest, right? That's the other dirty secret
I
of
mean, you
executives.
threaten them to charge interest, but there's no way you can charge your customers interest. I mean, you just,
No.
No, it's not.
even
No.
though
It's
you
not what you
threaten
do.
it, you can't.
So we would never, for us, I think it was about paying really close attention to pipeline, really close attention to like how many days open on average, what's our average closure rate in percentages, how many deals are out there, where are each of the stages. And I know that sounds weird, but for us, it was like constant vigilance on deal flow and receivables. So we would literally we made our head of HR do collections. Gail, she was like the sweetest person in the world. But then on the other side, it was pipeline management and knowing where it was. And, it gets a little dicey because you're like, fuck, we just closed like a $3 million deal and I can't staff it. Right. So then you're like, well, you write into the contract, it could take up to 30 days to staff your deal. You kind of gild the lily a little bit. But no, for us,
Oh, it's
I loved that. I love that chaos. I loved being in that model of where's the pipe, where are the deals, what's going to close, what isn't going to close, who still owes us money, which was really Eric's responsibility, and then working within that gap to staff because we were always interviewing, right? So we didn't tell people we were interviewing that we're just waiting for this one deal to close. But, a lot of our interviewing was getting ready to make an offer to bring somebody in. And we would take our more senior staff and prime it. We had done things in stages. There was an onboarding call that would basically take a couple of weeks. There were prerequisites they had to have in place. We had kickoff meetings, but we developed a system that allowed us to work, in front of not getting too far in front of our skis,
I mean,
and that may
sometimes we
sound odd,
did.
but
Sometimes we did, like you said, like sometimes like I was jumping at opportunities.
how big of a line of credit did you guys have out?
What was it, 80% of your accounts receivable?
Yeah, but I don't know what that means. But if you were doing 25 million, so that was like 20 million.
Oh, well, you don't have that much. I mean, if you think about a monthly receivable, like say you're, I don't know, pick a number.
Yeah,
Say your
2
monthly
million.
receivable is 10 million. If you're doing, I'm just using that as a number. So that means you're doing 120 million or something. That's a little bit too high, but so say your monthly receivable is 10 million. So say you had 10 million out and those were all under days. So those were good receivables. Then you could borrow up to 80% of that. So you could borrow up to 8 million.
Holy cow. We borrowed 50 grand our first year to like get started, and I wanted to throw up. And then we never borrowed another dime for
No,
30 years.
we were doing it every month, dude, because we added Magento and then we added Hybris and then I opened a London office. I mean, those are all significant outlays. Well, Kim, and you have an advisory board, so super helpful to have an advisory board to kind of run it by. Like, do you think it's a good idea to open a London office? Here's the outlay. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's not going to make money for a while. We're going to have to fund it. Like those kind of big things, and to have people that were going to kind of hold your feet to the fire.
I love, Kim, that you have an advisory board, 3, 4 months in. I
Great.
mean, we never did it, and I wish more people would, because I think that, as Rich said, it's kind of, and it's kind of like, your North Star, and we keep everybody in check. It isn't about keeping you in check, it's about keeping everybody in check, because people drift off the path a little bit.
Absolutely. I think we all know that the hard statistics around startups, 80% of them don't make it.
Yeah.
One thing is like, if I'm going to be involved in this company, we're going to do this because like we need, support from all areas. And I don't want to be one of those statistics. I want to be part of the 20%. So yeah, that's key.
It's great. Good for you.
Good. I appreciate those questions. I always love getting questions. I don't think we ever get the same questions either, Rich. I feel like they're always different. We do kind of come back to some similar stories, but I think what's old is new again with us anyway. So plus we're like running out of new shit. Sorry, our inventory is getting low. So Kim, I super appreciate you making time to come on the show this morning. It's a joy to talk to you. It's actually been a joy to collaborate with you and watch you lead this room of people when we're on the calls. And I'm always like chomping at the bit to do more than I'm signed up for. So it's been a lot of fun, and I love that you're learning as you go too. I think that's an amazing thing. And
It was a
it's
pleasure to
hard.
meet you, Kim. Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Thank you guys so much. It has been just a joy to talk with you and to chat and to like reminisce as well. So thank you for spending your time with me today. I appreciate it.
No problem. By the way, Kim, one of the unintended benefits of being on the podcast is you have Rich and I's cell phone, and we are always available for you as a sounding board or a panic button, or
100%.
anything like that. So we don't talk about that a lot, but like this doesn't end when the recording's over. We're always here for you. We've seen enough things where we're certainly, if nothing else, a good sounding board, or make you laugh when you don't feel like laughing. I'm good for that. Rich is a little more serious, but for for those still listening, we certainly appreciate you all checking in and listening to Tea with Rich. And today is Kim Georgeton of Cloudality. And Kim, I can't thank you enough for coming on, and hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm truly honored. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.